One common task in optics experiments is to set up a mirror to retroreflect light. In its simplest form, that just means taking light that's coming in one direction, placing a mirror such that it returns along the same path in which it came. Sometimes that's not enough though. Sometimes we also need to make sure that the curvature of the mirror is matched to the curvature of the wavefront, so that the beam at any point is the same size whether it's going or coming. If we retroreflect the beam, making sure to match the sizes of the input and output beams, then we can build things like Michelson interferometers or Twyman-Green interferometers, where we have light traveling different paths and recombining, and regardless of the length of those paths,